He was just 5 years old, small, barefoot and trembling on the cold sidewalk. Oliver held a piece of bread so old it had turned to stone, yet he bit into it as if it were the most precious meal in the world. Around him, hundreds of people walked by. Elegant shoes, rushing steps, eyes that never saw him. To them, he didn't exist. His little hands shook from hunger. His lips whispered to himself, "Maybe tonight I won't be so hungry." But the city didn't listen, not until she arrived. A black car stopped by the curb. From it stepped a woman dressed in cream, graceful, composed, her silver hair shining softly under the afternoon sun. Helena Carter. Everyone in the city knew her name, a woman of wealth, refinement, and influence. But that day, she did something no one expected. She saw the boy, truly saw him. Helena walked toward him, her heels clicking on the pavement, and when she reached him, she did the unthinkable. She knelt. The crowd gasped. Phones rose in the air. "What is she doing?" someone murmured. But Helena didn't care. She placed her knees on the dusty ground, looked into the frightened eyes of that starving child, and said softly, "If you eat here, little one, then I'll eat with you." Oliver froze, clutching his bread as if afraid it would vanish. For a moment, time itself stopped, a child and a woman from two worlds sharing the same silence, the same piece of bread, the same heartbeat. And no one there knew that Helena Carter carried a secret, one that connected her fate to that boy's hunger, one that would change both of their lives forever. The world often passes by the smallest souls, the ones who have nothing, not even a name that anyone remembers. Oliver was one of them. Just 5 years old, he lived between shadows and whispers, learning that the pavement could be a bed and that hunger could be a companion. Every sunrise felt the same, cold, empty, and endless. Yet that afternoon, the universe stopped pretending not to see him. Helena Carter didn't plan to stop her car. She didn't plan to kneel, but life has moments that break through even the strongest walls of comfort. As she watched that tiny boy bite into a piece of bread covered in dust, something inside her shattered. A memory, a wound, maybe a forgotten prayer. And in that instant she realized that real hunger isn't just in the stomach, it's in the heart. When Helena sat beside him, the street grew silent. The people, the noise, the judgment all disappeared. There was only a woman who had everything and a child who had nothing, sharing the same piece of bread as if it were sacred. What began as a simple act of compassion would soon reveal a truth too powerful to ignore. Because Helena Carter, the woman of grace and fortune, knew what it meant to feel abandoned. She had once been that child, the one no one saw, the one who waited in vain for someone to stay. This story is not just about wealth and poverty. It's about humanity, the invisible thread that ties us all together when the world forgets to care. So if you're watching this video, take a breath, open your heart, and stay until the end. Because sometimes a single act of kindness can rewrite an entire life. Subscribe, leave a like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Love and compassion speak the same language everywhere. The city woke early, but no one noticed the tiny figure curled near the bakery steps. Oliver's little body shivered beneath a torn blanket that smelled of rain and dust. The air carried the scent of fresh bread, sweet, golden, unreachable. He pressed his knees against his chest, eyes half open, and listened to the footsteps passing by. None slowed down, none looked. To the world, he was just another shadow on the sidewalk. His stomach ached with a dull, familiar pain. Hunger wasn't new. It was part of him now, like his heartbeat. He spotted a crust of bread near a trash bin, hardened and grey, and crawled toward it. His tiny fingers trembled as he picked it up, brushing off the dirt. For a moment, he smiled, a faint, fragile smile, as if he had found treasure. He whispered softly, "Thank you," not sure if he was speaking to God, to luck, or to no one at all. The first bite hurt his teeth, but he didn't stop. He closed his eyes, pretending the dry bread was warm soup, pretending he wasn't alone. Sometimes he spoke to himself to keep from crying. "Mommy will come today," he murmured, though deep inside he didn't believe it. The truth was heavier than the hunger. No one was coming. People passed, heels clicking, voices chatting, perfume filling the air, a world of color around a boy made of gray. Some wrinkled their noses, others crossed the street. A child once stared, curious, until her mother pulled her away. "Don't look," she said. And Oliver lowered his head, ashamed of simply existing. He spent the mornings wandering through alleys, searching for food scraps, bottle caps, or paper cups that still had a drop of juice left inside. Each discovery was a small victory. Each rejection was a quiet wound. Sometimes he stared through the bakery window, watching children point at cakes. He wished he could trade places with them, even for a single bite, even for a single smile. The cold pavement beneath him was his bed, the wind his lullaby. He had learned to count the hours by the shadows of buildings, waiting for the afternoon sun to warm his feet. He didn't dream of toys or candy anymore. He dreamed of a chair, a blanket, and a voice calling his name. That afternoon, the sky burned orange as cars glided by like silent ships. Oliver found a dry corner and sat down, holding his piece of bread carefully with both hands, as if it might vanish. He ate slowly, chewing every crumb like it mattered. That's when it happened. The soft sound of brakes, the low hum of a luxury engine stopping nearby. A black car door opened. From it stepped a woman dressed in cream, her silver hair glowing in the sunlight. She stood still for a moment, her gaze landing on the little boy in the dirt. People noticed her immediately. Helena Carter, the name whispered like admiration, the city's most respected woman. But Helena wasn't looking at the cameras or the whispers. She was looking at him, really seeing him. The small frame, the trembling hands, the eyes too old for 5 years of life. Something in her chest cracked open like glass. Oliver lifted his head just enough to meet her gaze. For a second, he froze, certain she would scold him or step away like everyone else. But instead, Helena's lips parted softly, and she took a slow step forward. The crowd kept walking, unaware that the world was about to pause, unaware that a hungry boy and a woman made of grace were about to change each other forever. For a moment, everything stood still. The city, the noise, even the wind. People paused mid-step, their conversations fading into a low murmur as Helena Carter's heels clicked softly against the pavement. Her presence commanded attention, not because of her wealth, but because of the silence that followed her. The woman in cream, known for elegance and grace, was now walking toward a small, barefoot boy sitting on the dirty curb, holding a crust of bread like it was gold. Oliver's heart pounded. He thought she would scold him like others had. He looked down quickly, trying to make himself invisible again. His small hands tightened around the hard piece of bread until his knuckles turned white. He wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't move. Then he heard her voice, low, warm, trembling slightly with emotion. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" He didn't answer. No one had ever asked him that before. Helena took another step closer, her eyes softening. In them, there was no disgust, no pity, only something raw and human. Without hesitation, she lowered herself to the ground. Her knees touched the cold, dusty concrete. A ripple of gasps moved through the bystanders. Someone whispered, "Is she really kneeling?" Another scoffed, "How inappropriate, she'll ruin her clothes." But Helena didn't care. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about her image, her reputation, or the expensive fabric brushing against the ground. All she could see was a fragile child trembling before her. "If you eat here," she said softly, "then I'll eat here with you." Oliver blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "But it's dirty," he murmured, his voice shaking. Helena smiled gently. "Then we'll both be a little dirty today." She extended her hand. "May I?" Slowly, cautiously, Oliver held out the bread. His fingers brushed hers, warm, clean, kind. Helena broke a small piece, brought it to her lips, and took a bite. Around them, the noise stopped. A woman covered her mouth in disbelief. A man muttered, "This is madness." Another person began filming, but Helena's calm face made them all feel small. Oliver stared at her, his wide eyes full of confusion and wonder. "Why are you doing this?" he whispered. Her gaze softened, her voice a whisper meant only for him. "Because you deserve to be seen, Oliver. You deserve to be treated like a person." At the sound of his name, the boy froze. He hadn't told her who he was. No one had spoken his name in weeks. Hearing it now felt like sunlight breaking through years of rain. Tears filled his eyes, spilling silently down his cheeks. "No one ever sits with me," he said in a trembling voice. Helena smiled sadly. "Then I suppose it's about time someone did." The crowd was restless now, some ashamed, some angry, others deeply moved but unable to admit it. A woman in a red coat crossed her arms and muttered, "What a show!" But a young man near her whispered, "No, that's compassion." Helena looked down at the boy again. His hair was tangled, his face streaked with dirt, but there was something pure in his eyes, a light that poverty hadn't managed to extinguish. "You remind me of someone I once was," she murmured. Her words trembled with truth she hadn't spoken aloud in years. Oliver tilted his head, confused. "You were like me?" he asked softly. Helena hesitated. "In some ways, yes. I know what it feels like to be hungry, to wait for someone who never comes." He stared at her, unsure whether to believe such a thing could be true. The woman before him looked like she had everything: jewels, fine clothes, a car shining under the sun. But there was a sadness in her expression that he recognized instantly, a sadness only lonely hearts carry. She looked around and noticed the stares, the judgment, the whispers, yet she smiled faintly, refusing to rise. "Sometimes," she said gently, "we must sit where others won't, to remember what it means to be human." Oliver clutched the bread and broke off a small piece, offering it back to her with trembling hands. "Here," he said, "you can have more." Helena's eyes glistened. "Thank you," she whispered. "This is the kindest gift I've received in a long time." At that moment, something invisible changed between them, a connection, fragile yet unbreakable. The woman of grace and the boy of dust shared a silence more powerful than words. When Helena finally lifted her gaze, she saw the crowd watching. But she no longer felt embarrassed. She felt proud. Because sitting there beside that little boy, she remembered who she truly was. And Oliver, for the first time in his life, felt what it meant to matter. The sun began to fade, stretching long shadows across the cracked pavement where Oliver and Helena sat. The world around them still buzzed with disbelief, whispers, camera flashes, hurried footsteps of people who didn't understand what they were witnessing. But to Oliver, the noise no longer mattered. For the first time, someone had stayed. He looked at Helena with wide, uncertain eyes. She was still kneeling beside him, her expensive skirt stained with dust. Her silver hair shimmered under the orange light, and her calm breathing matched his own fragile rhythm. For a moment he forgot he was a boy of the streets. He felt like someone who belonged, but as the evening wind began to rise, the fragile peace trembled. A gust of cold air swept through the street, lifting old papers and leaves. Oliver shivered violently. His thin shirt clung to his small chest, and his bare feet curled against the ground, searching for warmth that didn't exist. He tried to hide his trembling, afraid she would think he was weak. Helena noticed immediately. Without a word, she reached for the buttons of her long beige coat, the one worth more than everything Oliver had ever seen, and slipped it off her shoulders. Gasps rippled through the small crowd that still lingered nearby. A woman whispered, "She's giving him her coat." Another muttered, "That's madness. It'll get filthy." But Helena didn't flinch. She leaned forward, her movements slow, deliberate, as if the world had slowed down just for this gesture. She wrapped the coat gently around Oliver's shoulders. The fabric swallowed him whole, soft and warm, smelling faintly of perfume and comfort. "Here," she said, her voice low and soothing. "The cold hurts more than hunger. Let this keep you safe for now." Oliver froze. No one had ever covered him before. His whole life had been cold. Cold ground, cold air, cold stares. Now, wrapped in warmth, he didn't know what to do. His fingers gripped the fabric tightly, afraid it might vanish like a dream. "I can't take this," he whispered. "It's too nice." Helena smiled gently. "It's just a coat, darling, and right now it belongs exactly where it should." Tears welled up in Oliver's eyes. He hid his face in the fabric, breathing in the scent. It reminded him of something he couldn't name, something soft and distant, like a memory he'd never lived. Around them, the crowd's murmurs grew. Some were touched, others confused, but every person there felt something stir inside, something uncomfortable and beautiful. A man in a suit muttered to his companion, "All that money, and she's wasting it on a street boy." The companion didn't respond. His gaze stayed fixed on the woman and the child, his jaw tight. For once, people saw something money couldn't buy: humility. Helena lifted her eyes briefly and noticed the stares, but said nothing. She wasn't performing, she was remembering. Decades ago, she too had been that trembling child. No coat, no voice calling her name, just darkness and wind. Maybe that was why she couldn't walk away today, because to ignore Oliver would have been like abandoning herself all over again. "Why are you doing this?" Oliver asked softly, still half hidden beneath the coat. "You don't even know me." Helena's answer came without hesitation. "Because kindness doesn't ask for introductions." Oliver looked up, his cheeks streaked with tears. "But I have nothing to give you back," he said. She brushed a stray lock of hair from his forehead, her touch feather-light. "You've already given me something, Oliver. You've reminded me that love still exists." Those words hung in the air, heavy and luminous. The people nearby fell silent again. The city noise seemed distant, softened by the glow of the streetlights. For one sacred moment, the dirty sidewalk felt like holy ground. Helena stayed kneeling beside him, her hands resting lightly on his shoulders. Oliver leaned closer, trusting the warmth, letting the ache inside him quiet for the first time in years. The woman who had everything and the boy who had nothing sat side by side, and for a brief infinite second they were equals. The wind calmed, the sky darkened into indigo, and though Helena didn't yet realize it, that small act, the coat, the touch, the simple sharing of warmth, was not just a gesture of pity. It was the beginning of something far greater, redemption for both of them. The streetlights flickered to life as dusk sank into the city, painting the buildings with golden veins. The crowd that had gathered began to thin, their murmurs drifting away into the night. Yet Helena and Oliver remained, two silhouettes on the curb, united by silence and the beige coat that wrapped them both in warmth. Helena glanced at the boy beside her. His tiny frame seemed to disappear under the folds of fabric, and every so often he'd lift his head to look at her with shy curiosity. He wasn't used to company, much less kindness. To him, adults meant fear or rejection, never peace. Still, there was something in Helena's eyes that kept him from running, something gentle, something steady. "Are you warmer now?" she asked softly. Oliver nodded. though his small lips trembled. "Yes, Mom," he whispered. "It's really soft. Smells nice too." His voice cracked like dry paper, unused to words spoken aloud. Helena smiled faintly. "That's perfume. I suppose it clings to everything I wear." He tilted his head. "Is that what rich people smell like?" Helena chuckled under her breath, not mockingly, but tenderly. "Maybe. But I think kindness has its own scent, don't you?" Oliver blinked, unsure how to answer. He pressed the collar of the coat to his nose and nodded as if trying to memorize it. "It smells like safe," he said finally. That single word struck Helena like lightning. Safe. The very thing she had searched for all her life. Her throat tightened and she looked away before he could see the tears forming in her eyes. "You're very brave, Oliver," she said. He frowned slightly. "Brave? I'm not brave. I just stay here." "Sometimes staying," she replied gently, "takes more courage than people think." For a few moments, neither spoke. The rhythm of the city resumed around them, cars passing, laughter echoing from a nearby cafe, the scent of roasted coffee floating through the air. Life continued, but for these two souls, time had slowed to a quiet heartbeat. "Do you live here?" Helena asked, breaking the silence carefully, afraid of scaring him away. Oliver shrugged. "I live everywhere. Mostly near the bakery, 'cause it smells nice. Sometimes by the park bench when it's not too cold." He said it as if reciting facts, not tragedy. "The nights are the worst, though. The ground hurts after a while." Helena felt a sharp ache in her chest. "And your parents?" she asked softly. Oliver's eyes fell. "I don't remember them much. There was a lady who said she was my mama. She used to sing. Then one day she didn't come back." He rubbed his arm nervously. "After that, no one wanted me." Helena wanted to reach for him, to hold him, but she hesitated. Instead, she placed her hand near his, close enough for warmth, but far enough for choice. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "No one should grow up feeling unwanted." Oliver glanced at her hand, then placed his tiny fingers on top of hers. His touch was cautious, trembling. "You don't talk like other rich people," he said softly. "They always look at me like I'm dirt." Helena sighed, her voice low and wistful. "Maybe that's because they forgot what it feels like to be cold." He stared at her face, studying the lines of sadness etched beneath her kindness. "You've been cold too?" Helena's eyes shimmered. "Yes, sweetheart. Once, a long time ago. Cold, hungry, and invisible, just like you." Oliver's mouth opened slightly. "Then you're like me," he said, as if it were the most astonishing discovery in the world. Helena nodded slowly. "In more ways than you think." He smiled for the first time, small, fragile, and full of wonder. It wasn't the smile of a child who'd found joy. It was the smile of someone realizing they weren't alone anymore. Helena saw it and felt her heart soften in a way she hadn't felt since she was a girl. "Can I stay here with you a little longer?" Oliver asked timidly. Helena brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "You can stay as long as you want." He leaned against her arm, his breathing evening out. The coat rustled softly as she pulled it closer around him. The city lights shimmered above like distant stars, but Helena realized something profound. Warmth didn't come from silk or money. It came from presence. For the first time in years, she felt human again. And for the first time ever, Oliver felt loved. Neither of them knew it yet, but their simple conversation, a few words about safety, cold, and courage, had already begun to change everything. Night had fully settled over the city, draping the streets in soft amber light. Helena and Oliver remained on the same curb, surrounded by the faint hum of distant traffic. The world had moved on, but they hadn't. It was as if Time had built a quiet bubble around them, where truth could finally breathe. Oliver was half asleep, leaning gently against Helena's arm. His small breaths were slow and even, his face peaceful beneath the folds of the beige coat. Helena watched him, her heart aching at the fragility of that moment. How could someone so small, so pure, have known so much loneliness? The question burned inside her. She brushed a bit of dust from his cheek with the tenderness of someone who hadn't touched love in years. Her mind drifted backward to another cold night decades ago, a girl sitting in the rain behind a restaurant, watching people eat through the glass. Her stomach had twisted with hunger, her hands shaking as she pressed them against her chest. That girl had been Helena, before the mansions, before the pearls, before the world called her Mrs. Carter. She remembered the sound of her mother's voice, faint, kind, and always apologizing. "Someday, my love, you'll eat at a warm table." But that day never came. Her mother had fallen ill, and Helena was left alone to wander the streets, begging for food until a family took her in as a maid. From there, life had built her into someone strong, maybe too strong. She had learned how to never be hungry again, but in the process, she had starved her own heart. She looked down at Oliver and felt a shiver of recognition. The dirt on his face, the trembling hands, the desperate clutch of that coat. It was all too familiar. It was like looking into a mirror she hadn't dared face in years. "Oliver," she whispered, even though she thought he was asleep, "you remind me of someone I used to be." His eyes fluttered open. "Who?" he murmured drowsily. Helena smiled faintly. "A little girl who didn't believe anyone would ever care for her. She was cold and hungry, just like you." He blinked at her, curiosity sparking through his exhaustion. What happened to her? Helena hesitated, her throat tightening. "She survived," she said quietly, but she forgot how it felt to be small. She promised herself she'd never be weak again. And when she grew up, she built walls so high, even love couldn't climb them. Oliver frowned, as if trying to picture such a girl. Did she ever find someone to hug her? Helena felt tears rise behind her eyes. "No," she whispered. "Not until tonight." The boy tilted his head, confusion melting into something deeper. Empathy. He didn't understand everything she meant, but he sensed the sadness behind her smile. Slowly, he reached up his small hand and rested it against her cheek. "Then I'm hugging you now," he said simply. Helena froze, overcome by the innocence of that touch. It was soft, warm, and real, more healing than any applause or praise she'd ever received. She covered his hand with hers and whispered, "Thank you, my dear." They sat in silence again, the night air gentle around them. The faint sound of laughter drifted from a nearby cafe, and Helena wondered how many people inside would look away if they saw Oliver sitting outside. She had been one of those people once, pretending not to see, convincing herself that pity wasn't useful. But now she understood. Indifference was the cruelest form of hunger. Oliver yawned, leaning back against her. "You're not like the others," he mumbled sleepily. "You don't talk like them." Helena smiled softly. "Maybe that's because I remember what silence sounds like when no one answers you." His eyes closed, and he drifted into sleep. Helena stayed still, listening to the faint rhythm of his breathing, guarding him like something sacred. Her heart ached, not from guilt, but from awakening. She realized she wasn't rescuing a child. She was rescuing the part of herself she had buried long ago. As the city lights shimmered and a thin moon rose above the rooftops, Helena Carter understood something profound. Sometimes life brings back the ghosts of who we were, not to haunt us, but to let us make peace. And tonight, sitting beside a boy who had nothing, she finally felt rich again. The following morning arrived with a pale grey sky, the kind that seemed unsure whether to rain or to shine. Helena sat on a bench across the same street where she'd met Oliver, watching the boy sleep curled beneath her coat. His breathing was soft, his small chest rising and falling in fragile rhythm. She had stayed awake most of the night, not out of obligation, but because she couldn't look away. There was something sacred about watching him rest without fear. As the first cars passed, she handed him a warm roll she had bought before dawn. Oliver blinked awake, confused at first, then smiling shyly as the smell reached him. "Is that for me?" he asked, his voice still thick with sleep. "Of course," she said. "You deserve to start the day with something warm." He took it carefully, as if afraid it would disappear. His small hands trembled while he tore the bread into tiny pieces, making it last longer. Helena noticed, and her heart twisted. She had once eaten the same way, slowly, reverently, like someone afraid of running out of blessings. As Oliver ate, Helena's thoughts drifted again to the past. She remembered the ache of her own hunger, not just for food, but for affection, for safety, for someone who cared if she lived another day. Her memories came like ghosts. The nights she'd hidden from the rain under wooden stalls, the mornings she'd waited behind bakeries hoping for scraps. She had sworn back then that if she ever escaped that life, she would forget it forever. But she had been wrong. Some hungers never fade. They hide beneath silk and perfume, waiting for the right moment to resurface. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Oliver asked, noticing her distant stare. Helena blinked and smiled faintly. "You remind me of my past." "Was it bad?" he asked between bites. "It was difficult," she said carefully, "but it taught me things the world never could. It taught me how precious one piece of bread can be and how cold it feels to be unseen." Oliver nodded slowly, chewing in silence. Then, with the blunt honesty only a child could have, he said, "Then you know how much it hurts here." He placed his small hand over his stomach. Helena swallowed hard. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered. "I do." For a long while, neither of them spoke. The street around them began to stir. Workers hurrying to their jobs, students laughing as they passed. No one stopped to look, but Helena didn't mind. She knew that in a world obsessed with speed and success, true change happened only when someone dared to pause. She looked down at Oliver's bare feet, the small cuts and bruises along his toes. She removed her gloves, then slipped one of them off and reached for his foot. "May I?" she asked. He hesitated but nodded. Gently, she wrapped a strip of cloth torn from her scarf around his heel. "There," she said softly. "A little less pain for walking." Oliver stared at her hands, delicate, manicured, now smudged with dirt, and whispered, "Why are you nice to me? Other people get mad when I ask for help." Helena smiled sadly. "Because people fear what reminds them of their own weakness," she said. "But you're not weakness, Oliver. You're proof that strength can survive, even when everything else is taken away." He frowned, not fully understanding but feeling the truth in her voice. "Do you think I'll have a house one day?" Helena hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, and maybe, if you let me, I can help you find it." The boy's eyes widened. "You'd do that?" "I'd do it because someone once helped me," she said, "and because no one deserves to face the world alone." He looked at her for a long moment, then whispered, "You're not like other grown-ups." "Maybe," she said with a soft laugh. "Or maybe I just remembered what it means to be hungry." Oliver smiled faintly and leaned against her arm. The morning light grew brighter, and for the first time, Helena didn't hide from it. She realized that hunger, both his and hers, had brought them together, not as savior and victim, but as two souls who finally understood that compassion was the only meal that could truly fill an empty heart. By the next afternoon, the story had spread like wildfire through the city. Pictures of Helena Carter kneeling beside a homeless boy flooded social media and news feeds. Some headlines called it a moment of grace. Others sneered, a wealthy woman's publicity stunt. Helena didn't care to read them, but whispers still reached her. In coffee shops, in boardrooms, even among her friends, people were talking, and not all were kind. She was sitting in her office that day, a grand space filled with glass and silence. The beige coat she had wrapped around Oliver hung on the back of a chair, faintly creased and still carrying the scent of street dust. Helena brushed her fingers across it gently, as if it were made of something far more delicate than wool. Her assistant had told her that journalists were asking for interviews, but she refused them all. She hadn't knelt for an audience. She had knelt because her heart had told her to. A knock broke her thoughts. The door opened, and in stepped Margaret Langford, an old friend and socialite whose name was as heavy as her jewelry. Her perfume entered the room before she did. "Helena," she said, forcing a polite smile, "we need to talk." Helena's stomach tightened. She knew that tone, the voice of judgment wrapped in concern. "Good afternoon, Margaret," she said evenly. "What brings you here?" Margaret closed the door and lowered her voice. "You can imagine the scandal you've caused. The photographs are everywhere. You kneeling on the ground, touching that boy, feeding him bread off the pavement. Helena, what were you thinking?" Helena leaned back in her chair, her gaze calm but steady. "I was thinking that a hungry child deserved to be seen." Margaret sighed dramatically, sitting across from her. "Helena, we give donations every year. We host charity galas, but we don't kneel in the dirt. You've built your reputation on dignity, and now people are laughing." Helena tilted her head. "If dignity means closing my eyes to suffering, I'd rather be laughed at." Margaret blinked, momentarily speechless. "But, darling, you must understand how this looks. The board is nervous. Investors might think you've lost your sense of reason." "I haven't lost reason," Helena said softly. "I've found my conscience." There was a pause, heavy, uncomfortable. Outside the window, the city glimmered with glass and speed, oblivious to the small war inside the office. Margaret's tone hardened. "You've worked all your life to climb out of the gutter, Helena. Why on earth would you crawl back into it?" The words landed like stones, echoing the voices Helena used to hear in her youth, the ones that said she didn't belong. She stood slowly, her hands resting on the desk for balance. "Because," she said quietly, "I remember what it felt like to be down there." Margaret scoffed, her diamond earrings catching the light. "You can't save them all. There will always be another Oliver." Helena smiled sadly. "Then I'll start with one." Margaret rose, offended. "People are saying you've gone soft, that you're letting emotion cloud your judgment." Helena turned toward the window, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. "Emotion is what makes judgment human." For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic far below. Then Margaret muttered, "The world doesn't change because one woman kneels, Helena." "No," Helena replied, her voice steady. "But maybe it begins to." Margaret shook her head, defeated, and left the room. The scent of her perfume lingered behind, mingling with the faint trace of dust from Oliver's coat. Helena sat back down and closed her eyes. She could still see his small face looking up at her, still hear his shy question. "You're not like the others, are you?" Later that evening, Helena returned to the same street where they had met. Oliver was waiting, sitting on the curb, holding a piece of bread wrapped in napkin. When he saw her, he smiled so brightly it erased the shadows around him. "You came back," he said. "Of course I did," she replied softly. And as she sat beside him again, Helena realized that she didn't need the world's approval, only the honesty in that child's eyes. For the first time, she felt unshakably certain. Compassion is the only wealth worth keeping. The following day dawned quiet and pale, with a soft drizzle coating the streets. Helena walked slowly through the same alley where she had first found Oliver. The air smelled of wet dust and bread, and her beige umbrella tilted slightly as she searched for the boy's familiar shape. When she saw him sitting beneath a rusted awning, hugging her coat tightly around his shoulders, her chest warmed despite the chill. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said softly. Oliver lifted his head, eyes bright. "You came back again," he exclaimed, his voice small but alive. "I saved a piece of bread for you." He held out a crumpled napkin with a soggy crust inside. Helena knelt beside him, her knees pressing into the damp ground without hesitation. "You didn't have to save it for me," she whispered. He shook his head earnestly. "You shared yours first. Now it's my turn." That simple gesture, tiny, pure, and selfless, cracked something open in Helena's heart. She took the bread, broke it in half, and ate a small piece. The taste was bland, almost bitter, but to her it was sacred. "Thank you, Oliver," she said, her voice trembling. "This means more than you know." He smiled shyly, clutching the other half of the bread, proud of the exchange. "We're even now," he said. Helena looked at him, and her eyes filled with tears. "No, my dear," she murmured. "You've given me far more." Oliver frowned. "How?" Helena didn't answer right away. Her throat tightened as memories returned uninvited. The nights she'd hidden behind trash bins, the way her stomach had twisted with hunger, the ache of feeling invisible. "Because you reminded me who I was," she finally whispered, "and who I want to be again." A single tear slipped down her cheek, gliding through the faint lines of age. Oliver noticed immediately. "Are you crying?" he asked softly. Helena smiled through her tears. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they feel something beautiful. He tilted his head, puzzled. "But beautiful things don't hurt." "They do," she said, "when they remind us of what we lost." For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain pattered gently around them, and the world seemed to shrink until it was just the two of them, an old wound meeting its mirror image in a child's innocence. Then, without hesitation, Oliver leaned forward and wrapped his thin arms around her. The movement was clumsy, his little hands barely reaching her back, but it was a hug nonetheless, his first gift freely given. Helena froze for a heartbeat, her breath catching. No one had held her like that in years. Then she closed her eyes and returned the embrace, her arms sheltering him from the drizzle. The world could spin, gossip, and judge all it wanted. Here, there was only truth. "You're warm," he murmured against her shoulder. "You smell like flowers." Helena laughed softly, the sound breaking through the rain. "And you smell like rain and courage," she said. He grinned, eyes glimmering. "You think I'm brave?" "The bravest boy I've ever met." From across the street, a few people watched in silence. Some took photos again, but this time, even through the lenses, something changed. The image wasn't scandal anymore, it was grace. The sight of a woman crying in the arms of a child, stripped of everything, reminded them that love still existed in unexpected places. When they pulled apart, Helena looked at him with new resolve. "Oliver, would you let me take you somewhere warm tonight?" He hesitated, biting his lip. "You mean inside? Like a real house?" She nodded. "A place with food, a bed, and people who care." Oliver's eyes filled with disbelief. "And you'll be there too?" Helena smiled gently. "Yes, my dear, I'll be there." He exhaled shakily, his little shoulders trembling. Then he nodded, so small and sure it broke her heart. "Okay." As they stood, Helena took his hand, tiny, cold and fragile in her own, and together they stepped into the street. The rain fell harder now, washing the dust from the pavement. Behind them, the echoes of the city faded. Ahead of them waited a door, a light, and a future neither had dared to imagine. One tear had fallen, but its ripple was endless. The rain had eased by the time Helena and Oliver reached the small cafe at the corner. The windows glowed warmly against the grey afternoon, and the scent of coffee and bread drifted into the air. Helena paused, letting Oliver take it all in. He stood motionless, staring through the glass at the shelves lined with pastries, his reflection faint and trembling against the light. "Go ahead," Helena whispered with a smile. "It's all right to look." Oliver pressed his hand to the glass, eyes wide. "It smells like heaven," he murmured. Helena opened the door, and the little bell above it chimed. Heads turned. A few customers recognized her immediately, their expressions shifting from admiration to confusion when they noticed the barefoot boy beside her. But Helena ignored the stares. She guided Oliver to a table by the window, her hand gently resting on his shoulder. A waitress approached, hesitating. "Mrs. Carter?" she asked softly. "Yes," Helena said, her tone calm and kind. "Would you please bring us 2 bowls of soup and something sweet for dessert, whatever he wants?" The waitress smiled at Oliver. "What do you like, sweetheart?" He hesitated, looking from her to Helena. Can I have the one with chocolate?" Helena nodded. "Of course." When the food arrived, Oliver stared at the bowl of soup as if it were a miracle. Steam rose in soft curls, and the smell filled his senses. He gripped the spoon with both hands, dipping it slowly. The first sip made him close his eyes. It was warm, real warmth that spread through his chest like light. Helena watched silently, her throat tight. She could feel the weight of the moment, the holiness in its simplicity. When he finally looked up, his lips curved into a small smile. "I think my tummy is happy," he said, his voice almost shy. She laughed softly. "I think mine is too." For a while they ate without words. Outside, the rain washed the streets clean. Inside, time seemed to hold its breath, letting them exist in a space untouched by pity or pride. When they finished, Oliver leaned back in his chair, sleepy but content. "I don't want to go back to the cold," he said quietly. "I want to stay here forever." Helena reached across the table, taking his small hand in hers. "You don't have to go back," she said. "Not anymore." He blinked, unsure if he had heard her right. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said gently, "that I won't let you face those streets alone again. I'll help you find a home, a place where you can sleep safely and eat every day. You'll never have to beg again, Oliver." The boy's eyes widened, tears filling them instantly. "People always say things like that," he whispered, "but then they leave." Helena squeezed his hand. "I'm not everyone." He shook his head. "What if you change your mind? What if you forget me?" Helena leaned closer, her eyes steady and bright. "Listen to me, sweetheart. I will never forget you. You have my word. As long as I live, you'll have someone who cares about you. That's a promise." Oliver stared at her, searching her face for doubt, but found only truth. Then, with trembling lips, he whispered, "No one ever promised me anything before." Helena's eyes glistened. "Then this will be your first." He nodded slowly, as though afraid the moment might break. "Okay," he said, "then I promise too. I'll be good. I'll try hard. I'll never forget you either." Helena smiled through tears. "That's all I could ever ask for." As they left the cafe, the city lights flickered to life. The sidewalks gleamed wet beneath their feet, and the air smelled of renewal. Helena slipped her hand into Oliver's again, feeling the small, fragile pulse of his fingers in hers. "You see, Oliver," she said softly, "sometimes all it takes to change a life is one promise. made on a sidewalk in the rain. He looked up at her, eyes bright and innocent. "And you kept it." She smiled. "Yes, my dear, I always will." They walked on together, hand in hand, the street behind them fading into the night, leaving only the echo of their promise lingering in the air, quiet and eternal. The car moved slowly through the rain-slicked streets. Oliver sat in the back seat, still wrapped in Helena's coat, his eyes darting between the window and the woman beside him. Streetlights slid across his face like passing stars. Every flash of light revealed disbelief, hope, and fear, all tangled together. "Where are we going?" he asked finally, his voice small. "To a place where you can rest," Helena answered. "A home that keeps its door open for children like you." He clutched the coat tighter. "But they won't want me. No one ever does." Helena turned toward him, her voice steady but tender. "Then they'll have to want you, because I do." Oliver didn't know what to say. He looked down at his dirty hands, tracing the seam of the coat sleeve. The warmth still felt unreal. He whispered, "If I wake up and it's gone, I'll think I dreamed you." Helena smiled sadly. "Then I promise to still be here when you open your eyes." When they arrived, the car stopped in front of an old stone building with white curtains glowing softly behind the windows. The sign above the door read, "The Haven." A woman stood waiting beneath the awning, Sister Amelia, with kind eyes and hands that smelled of flour and soap. Helena introduced them. "This is Oliver," she said. "He's been very brave." Sister Amelia bent down until her eyes met the boys. "Hello, sweetheart," she said warmly. "We saved you a room. It even has a window that catches the morning sun." Oliver hesitated, looking up at Helena for reassurance. She nodded gently. "Go on." He stepped inside slowly, his bare feet sinking into a carpet softer than anything he'd ever touched. The smell of bread baking filled the hall. A small fireplace crackled near the corner, its glow painting the walls gold. For the first time, the air didn't sting his lungs. It welcomed him. Helena followed, watching his every reaction as though afraid to blink and miss it. Oliver ran his fingers along the wooden furniture, touching everything carefully, reverently. "It's so clean," he whispered. "Too clean for me," Sister Amelia chuckled. "Nonsense, dear. You belong anywhere there's love." She handed him a towel and pointed down the hall. "There's warm water waiting if you'd like to wash up before supper." Oliver's throat tightened. He didn't remember the last time someone had offered him water that wasn't from a puddle or a bottle left behind. He nodded, unable to speak, and disappeared toward the washroom. Helena stood by the doorway, her heart swelling. She could hear the faint splash of water followed by small giggles, hesitant at first, then free. When Oliver re-emerged, his hair clung to his forehead and his cheeks glowed pink from warmth. He looked lighter, almost new. Supper was simple, soup and bread, but to Oliver it felt like a feast. He sat beside Helena at the long table, surrounded by other children who smiled at him without judgment. For a few minutes, he forgot the cold sidewalks, the hunger, the fear. Between spoonfuls, he looked up and whispered, "Is this what home feels like?" Helena reached out and tucked a lock of hair behind his ear. "Yes, sweetheart. This is what home feels like. Safety, warmth, and someone waiting for you at the table." When the meal ended, Sister Amelia showed him to a small room. The bed had white sheets and a single stuffed bear resting on the pillow. Oliver stared at it, unsure what to do. "It's yours," Helena said softly. "All of it." He turned, tears pooling in his eyes. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Helena knelt beside him, smoothing the blanket. "Tomorrow and every day you need me." He crawled into bed, clutching the bear, and whispered, "I'll wait for you." Helena smiled, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "And I'll come." As she turned off the lamp, a soft glow lingered around the boy's face, the light of safety, of being seen. For the first time, Oliver fell asleep, not to the sound of wind and traffic, but to the heartbeat of peace. And for the first time in decades, Helena Carter left a room feeling whole. By the next morning, the city was already buzzing with whispers. Newspapers printed the story beneath bold headlines: Helena Carter, the heiress who shared bread with a street boy. The photos had gone viral. Helena kneeling in the rain, her coat around Oliver's shoulders, the small boy clutching her hand. To some, it was a miracle. To others, madness. Helena woke early, her phone vibrating endlessly on the nightstand. Reporters begged for interviews. Commentators on television debated her intentions. A publicity stunt, one said. A genuine act of humanity, said another. Helena silenced the phone, poured a cup of tea, and stared out the window. She had never sought attention, and yet, for once, she didn't mind being seen for something that mattered. Still, not everyone shared her peace. By mid-morning, she arrived at her foundation's office, where several board members were waiting with anxious faces. Helena, the press is relentless, said Mr. Dalton, her financial advisor. We can't control the narrative. You're trending everywhere. Helena set down her purse calmly. Then let them talk. But this could damage our reputation, he continued. The donors, let them see who we really are, she interrupted. Her voice was calm, but her eyes gleamed. If they can't support compassion, their money isn't worth keeping. The room fell silent. For a moment, no one dared to speak. Then an assistant entered timidly. Ma'am, she said, there's a woman here to see you. She says she met you on the street yesterday. Helena's heart skipped. Send her in. The door opened and Sister Amelia stepped inside, smiling warmly. He's adjusting beautifully, she said before Helena could ask. He slept through the night. He woke up asking when you'd come. Helena exhaled in relief. Thank God, she murmured. And thank you, sister. Amelia's smile faded slightly. But there's something else. Reporters have already found the Haven. They want to see him, to photograph him. Helena's jaw tightened. No, absolutely not. They're saying the city deserves to meet the boy who melted Helena Carter's heart, Amelia added. Helena shook her head. Oliver is not a story. He's a child. They will not use him for spectacle. She left the office almost immediately, the board's worried murmurs trailing behind her. Outside, cameras flashed as she stepped into her car. Mrs. Carter, is it true you're adopting him? Someone shouted. Are you turning your charity into an orphanage? Another asked. Helena ignored them, her face calm but her heart pounding. When she arrived at the Haven, Oliver was in the courtyard, sitting on a wooden bench, feeding crumbs to a small bird that had landed beside him. He looked up, his face lighting up instantly. You came back? Of course, she said, kneeling beside him. How are you feeling? Happy, he said simply. But some people came. They wanted to take pictures. I hid. Helena's chest ached. She brushed his hair gently. You did the right thing. You don't have to let anyone look at you if it doesn't feel right. He tilted his head. Why do they want pictures of me? Because, she said softly, the world sometimes needs to see kindness to believe it still exists. He frowned, thinking hard. But kindness isn't for showing, it's for doing. Helena smiled, slow, proud, tearful. Exactly, my love. Exactly. The reporters left eventually, frustrated that Helena refused interviews. But what they didn't know was that her silence was its own kind of statement. Acts of true compassion didn't need explanations, they simply echoed. In the following days, letters began arriving at her home and office. Hundreds of them, from strangers, parents, and children. Some thanked her for her courage. Others confessed they had been moved to share food, to help, to see. One note in a child's handwriting stood out, "My mum says I can't change the world, but I gave my sandwich to a man who was hungry. I think maybe that's how it starts." Helena folded the letter and placed it on her desk beside Oliver's photo. A small image Sister Amelia had taken that morning of him smiling shyly, clean and safe. She touched the picture gently and whispered, "You see, Oliver, you've already changed the world." Outside, the city pulsed as it always did, fast, cold, distracted. But somewhere in its heart, a light had been lit, one that would not fade easily. And as Helena watched the rain start again, she smiled, knowing that sometimes all it took to move a city was the love between a woman who knelt and the boy who dared to believe in her. The night was unusually quiet. A gentle wind carried the faint smell of rain and bread from the bakery down the street. Inside the haven, the children were already asleep, their soft breathing filling the halls like a lullaby. Only one small lamp still burned, the one beside Oliver's bed. He sat up, hugging his knees under the blanket, eyes fixed on the window where the moonlight painted silver shapes across the floor. He was waiting. A light knock echoed at the door. Oliver's face brightened. "Come in," he whispered. Helena stepped inside, carrying 2 cups of warm milk. She looked tired but radiant, her silver hair glowing softly in the dim light. "You should be asleep," she said gently. "I couldn't," Oliver admitted. "I thought maybe you wouldn't come." Helena smiled, setting 1 cup in his hands. "I always keep my promises." He took a careful sip, the warmth chasing away the chill. "It's sweet," he said. "I added honey. My mother used to do the same when I couldn't sleep." The word mother lingered between them, soft and heavy. Helena sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes distant. "Would you like me to tell you a story tonight?" she asked. Oliver nodded eagerly. "Is it a happy one?" Helena hesitated, then shook her head. "It's a true one." She took a deep breath. "A long time ago, there was a little girl who lived in a small house by the factory district. Her mother worked all day, and the girl waited by the door, watching the smoke rise from the chimneys. Some nights they didn't have dinner. Some nights the girl went to sleep whispering to her mother that she wasn't hungry, even when her stomach hurt. Oliver listened intently, eyes wide and glistening. Was she scared? Helena nodded. Every day, but she loved her mother more than anything. Until one night, her mother didn't come home. The girl waited for hours, then days. When they found her mother, it was too late. Her voice cracked slightly, but she continued. The girl grew up alone. People said she was strong, that she survived. But what they didn't see was how her heart froze so it wouldn't break again. Oliver's tiny fingers gripped the blanket tightly. "That girl was you, wasn't it?" Helena looked at him, her eyes shimmering. "Yes, it was." The room went silent except for the soft ticking of a clock somewhere down the hall. Oliver's lip trembled. "So that's why you sat with me that day," he whispered. "Because you knew." "I knew," she said. "When I saw you sitting there, holding that piece of bread, I saw myself. I remembered the nights I prayed for someone to see me, and I couldn't keep walking." Oliver reached out his hand and placed it on hers. "You didn't have to stop," he said softly, "but I'm glad you did." Helena turned her hand, holding his small fingers. "You saved me, Oliver. You made me remember what it means to feel." He tilted his head. "But I didn't do anything." "Yes, you did," she whispered. "You looked at me without asking for anything. You reminded me that kindness isn't something we lose. It's something we forget to use." Tears rolled down her cheeks, quiet and slow. She wiped them quickly, embarrassed, but Oliver frowned. "You can cry," he said. "It doesn't make you weak." Helena laughed softly, surprised by the wisdom in his little voice. "You sound like an old soul." He smiled. Sister Amelia says that means I've lived a lot in a short time. Helena touched his cheek tenderly. You've lived too much, sweetheart. For a moment they sat in silence, hands still joined. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly, but neither moved. The air between them was heavy with unspoken understanding, the kind that only two people who had tasted hunger, both of the stomach and of the heart, could share. When Oliver's eyes began to close, she tucked the blanket around him, brushing his hair from his forehead. Helena, he murmured, half asleep. Do you think my mum can see me now? Helena's voice broke as she whispered, Yes, Oliver, she can. And she's proud. So proud. He smiled, his breathing slowing. Then I'm not alone anymore. No, Helena said softly. Neither of us are. She stayed there long after he fell asleep, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. For the first time in her life, Helena Carter felt forgiven, not by the world, but by the little child she used to be. The morning light crept softly across the room, painting thin golden stripes over Helena's desk. She sat in her study, a cup of tea untouched beside a pile of letters. Since that day in the Haven, her life had begun to change in quiet, invisible ways. She smiled more easily, she walked slower, and every morning she thought first of a boy who used to be invisible. The world still talked, articles, interviews, endless opinions, but Helena had stopped listening. Instead, she found herself writing letters, not to journalists, not to donors, but to Oliver. She wrote them on cream paper with her fountain pen, each one signed with the same line, "You are not forgotten." She kept them in a drawer near the window, promising herself she'd give them to him when he was older. But that morning, as she looked for stationery, her fingers brushed something she hadn't seen in years, an old yellowed envelope, folded at the edges and tied with a faded blue ribbon. She froze. Her breath caught in her throat. The handwriting on the front was delicate, slightly slanted. It read, "To my Helena, read this when you are ready to forgive." It was her mother's handwriting. Helena's hands trembled as she untied the ribbon and unfolded the letter. The paper smelled faintly of lavender and dust. She could almost see her mother's face again, the soft eyes, the tired smile, the voice that hummed lullabies between coughs. And then she began to read. "My little girl, I know that life will not be kind to you. The world is not gentle with those who have little, but I pray you never lose your gentleness. If hunger ever comes, may it not make you bitter. If loneliness finds you, may you still reach out to others, because compassion, my love, is the only thing that will keep your heart alive." The words blurred as Helena's tears fell onto the page. She pressed the letter to her chest, sobbing quietly, not with grief, but with release. The pain she had carried for decades finally had a voice. Her mother's words felt like a bridge across time, reaching out to the woman Helena had become and the child she once was. She sat there for a long time, trembling, until the sound of laughter from the courtyard broke her trance. She wiped her eyes and rose slowly, still holding the letter. Outside, sunlight poured across the Haven's garden, where Oliver and a few other children were chasing bubbles that Sister Amelia blew into the air. Their laughter rang bright and pure, echoing against the stone walls. Helena watched from the doorway, her heart swelling. Oliver saw her first. "Helena!" he shouted joyfully, running toward her with open arms. She knelt, and he crashed into her embrace. The smell of soap and sunshine clung to him. "Look, I made a friend," he said proudly, pointing to another boy waving shyly from the garden. "That's wonderful," she said, smiling through her tears. "You're glowing, sweetheart." He tilted his head curiously. "Why are you crying again?" Helena chuckled softly, brushing her cheeks. "Because I'm happy. Because someone I love reminded me what matters." She took the letter from her pocket, folded neatly in her hands. "Oliver, may I tell you something my mother once told me?" He nodded. She said that compassion keeps the heart alive, that when we care for someone else, we become stronger, not weaker. She placed her palm gently over his chest. Do you feel that? That's your heart reminding you to keep caring. Oliver looked down, then back up at her with a serious expression far too wise for his age. Then I'll never stop caring, he said simply. Helena smiled, the sunlight catching the tears still clinging to her lashes. Neither will I. Later that evening, she placed her mother's letter in a new envelope, one addressed to Oliver. Open this when you are ready to forgive the world. She slipped it into the same drawer where her old pain had rested and locked it. For the first time, she felt as though her mother's promise had been fulfilled through a boy who had once sat alone in the rain. Sometimes, healing didn't come from forgetting. It came from passing love forward, one letter, one act, one child at a time. Spring came quietly to the city. The rain softened into gentle drizzles, and the air smelled of blooming jasmine. The courtyard of the Haven was now alive each morning with laughter, the sound of children's feet on the cobblestones, and the chirping of sparrows that nested above the windows. Among them, Oliver ran barefoot, chasing the light. He had grown stronger. His cheeks, once hollow, now carried a faint blush of life. His hair was clean, his hands warm. But what changed most were his eyes, no longer empty, no longer searching. They carried light now, like tiny lanterns that refused to go out. Helena visited him every day. She often brought books or small pastries, pretending it was just to spoil him a little. But everyone knew it was more than that. The two of them had become inseparable, a woman rediscovering love and a child rediscovering trust. When they walked together through the garden, it was as if they were walking through two timelines that had finally met. One morning, Sister Amelia called Helena aside. "You've given him something none of us could," she said kindly. "He smiles in his sleep now." Helena's eyes softened. "He's given me something too, forgiveness I didn't know I needed." Amelia smiled. "Children have that power. They see who we are, not who we pretend to be." That afternoon, Helena found Oliver sitting beneath the fig tree, drawing in a small notebook. "What are you making?" she asked, sitting beside him. He grinned and held up the page. It showed two stick figures, a small boy holding hands with a tall woman, both smiling under the sun. "It's us," he said proudly. "I wanted to draw the day you found me." Helena's throat tightened. "That's beautiful, Oliver." He pointed to a circle in the corner of the page. "That's the bread we shared. I put it there because that's when everything started to feel different." She brushed his hair gently. "What changed, sweetheart?" He looked up, thoughtful. "I stopped being invisible." Helena had no words. Tears filled her eyes, but they were soft tears, not of sadness, but of awe. "You were never invisible, Oliver. The world just needed to open its eyes." He shook his head. "No, you opened them. You saw me first." That evening, Helena and Oliver walked to the park near the river. The sky was painted with streaks of gold and pink, and the city hummed quietly in the distance. Helena carried a small picnic basket, and Oliver ran ahead, laughing as he chased the wind. When they reached the riverbank, he sat cross-legged on the grass, looking at the rippling water. "Do you ever think about your mom?" he asked suddenly. Helena nodded slowly. "Every day, but when I see you, I think she's proud of me again." He smiled. "I think she is too." The conversation drifted into silence. A family passed nearby, a mother, a father, two children holding ice cream cones, and Oliver watched them for a moment, then turned back to Helena. "Do you think I'll have a family like that someday?" Helena looked at him tenderly. "You already do." He frowned. "What do you mean?" She reached over and took his hand. "Family isn't always the one we're born into, Oliver. Sometimes it's the people who show up when we need them most." He squeezed her hand tightly. "Then you're my family." Her smile trembled. "And you're mine." They sat until the sky turned violet, their silhouettes reflected in the darkening water. Around them, the city glowed, streetlights flickering, life continuing. But for Helena, this small moment on the grass with a boy who once hid from the world was everything. On their way back to the haven, Oliver stopped and looked up at the stars. "You know," he said softly, "when I used to sleep on the streets, I always talked to the stars. I thought they were my friends, but they never talked back." Helena smiled, looking at the same sky. Maybe they were listening. Maybe they waited for someone to answer for them. Oliver's eyes sparkled. "Then you were the answer." Helena laughed through her tears. "And you were the question I didn't know I needed." When they reached the gates, he hugged her tightly. "Thank you for finding me." She knelt, holding him close. "No, my dear. Thank you for helping me find myself." That night, as Oliver drifted into sleep under a roof that no longer felt borrowed, he whispered to the stars, "I'm not invisible anymore." And somewhere, in that gentle space between heaven and earth, an old pain finally turned into light. Months passed, and spring slowly gave way to summer. The days at the haven grew brighter, filled with the laughter of children playing in the courtyard, the smell of fresh bread from the kitchen, and the sound of Sister Amelia's piano floating through the halls at dusk. Among those sounds, there was always one that stood out. Oliver's voice, soft and full of life, calling Helena's name each time she arrived. He had changed. His cheeks glowed, his steps were lighter, and his laughter came easily now. He went to classes, helped the younger children tie their shoes, and greeted each morning with the same words, "It's a new day, Miss Helena." Helena's visits became a ritual. Every afternoon, she would appear at the gate with a gentle smile and a basket of pastries. Together, they would walk through the garden, talking about little things, dreams, clouds, stories. But beneath those simple conversations was something deeper. Two souls who had once been broken, slowly learning to heal through each other. One afternoon, Helena arrived to find Oliver waiting with a small surprise. "Close your eyes," he said, grinning. She obeyed, and when she opened them, she saw a small painting, clumsy but full of heart. It showed a woman kneeling beside a boy, both surrounded by golden light. At the bottom, in uneven letters, he had written, "What she gave me wasn't bread, it was love." Helena pressed a hand to her mouth, overcome. "Oh, Oliver, this is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me." He beamed. "Now you can remember that day forever." She knelt and hugged him tightly. "I could never forget, sweetheart. That day changed my life." He looked up, puzzled. "But I was just sitting on the ground." Helena smiled. "And I was just walking by. Yet somehow we saved each other." They sat beneath the fig tree, their favorite spot, as the sunlight filtered through the leaves. Birds hopped close, fearless, as if sensing peace. "Do you ever wonder why we met?" Oliver asked. Helena looked up at the sky. "I think the universe knows when two hearts are missing their other piece." Oliver tilted his head. "Like a puzzle." "Exactly," she said. "You were the piece I didn't know I'd lost." He laughed quietly, then grew thoughtful. "When I grow up, I want to be like you." "Like me?" Helena chuckled softly. "Oh no, you should be even better. Kinder, braver, freer." He grinned. "Then I'll help people who feel small, the ones nobody sees, just like you helped me." Helena felt a lump form in her throat. "Then the world will be a brighter place." The sun began to lower, spilling gold across the garden. The children were called in for supper, but Helena and Oliver stayed behind, unwilling to break the moment. She watched him chase a butterfly, his laughter echoing like music. It was hard to believe that not long ago, this same boy had been trembling in the rain, clutching a piece of dirty bread. When he returned, breathless and smiling, she took his hand. "Oliver, I need you to promise me something." He nodded quickly. "Anything. No matter where life takes you, never stop believing in kindness. The world will try to make you forget, but don't let it. Promise me that." "I promise," he said solemnly. She brushed his cheek tenderly. "That's all I ever wanted." As the evening deepened, the sky turned a soft violet. Helena stood, looking around the haven, the walls alive with laughter, the garden full of light, and she felt something stir inside her. Peace. The kind she hadn't known since childhood. That night, before leaving, she stopped at Oliver's door. He was already in bed, half asleep, his stuffed bear tucked under his arm. "Helena," he murmured without opening his eyes. "If you hadn't sat with me that day, do you think I'd still be there?" She smiled sadly. "I think we both would." He smiled faintly, already drifting into dreams. "Then I'm glad you sat down." Helena whispered, "Me too." She turned off the lamp, leaving the door slightly open. The hallway glowed softly, and the faint sound of Oliver's breathing filled the air. As she walked outside into the night, she looked up at the stars, the same stars that once watched over a hungry boy and a lonely woman. And she whispered, "We are all equal beneath this sky." And somewhere between heaven and earth, two hearts, one small, one weary, beat in harmony, forever bound by a lesson as simple as it was eternal. True greatness begins when we dare to kneel beside another soul. Time passed, but the story of Helena Carter and the boy she refused to walk past never faded. Some called it charity, others called it faith, but to those who truly understood, it was something far greater: humanity rediscovered. Oliver grew under the warmth of love he had once thought impossible. His laughter filled rooms that had long forgotten joy. Helena watched him become the living proof that kindness could rewrite destiny. Every visit, every shared meal, every gentle word was a reminder that small acts could ripple through generations. One summer evening, as they sat together beneath the old fig tree, Oliver leaned his head on her shoulder and whispered, "You know, Helena, when you sat with me that day, I stopped being hungry." Helena smiled softly. "You mean the bread?" He shook his head. "No, the world stopped feeling empty." Her eyes filled with tears, and she pressed his hand to her heart. In that quiet moment she understood. It was never about wealth or sacrifice. It was about seeing. And so their story became a promise whispered through time that compassion doesn't belong to saints or angels. It begins on ordinary sidewalks, in ordinary hearts, when someone simply decides to kneel,